All right, so you want to talk political systems, right?
Let's do it.
Get ready to have some assumptions challenged,
Oh, yeah.
because today we're diving deep into Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed.
Okay.
And let me tell you, this book throws some serious curveballs.
It really does. We tend to think of democracy as the gold standard of government,
Right.
the inevitable endpoint of progress.
Yeah.
But Hoppe asks a really provocative question.
Okay.
What if we've got it all wrong?
Okay, stop right there. You had me at what if we've got it all wrong?
Uh-huh.
I'm already intrigued. So tell me, how does Hoppe even begin to unpack that argument?
Okay.
Because honestly, when I think monarchy, I'm picturing opulent palaces, endless wars,
Sure.
and maybe a beheading or two if someone looks at the king funny.
Yeah, that's a pretty common image.
Right.
But Hoppe wants us to look beyond the stereotypes.
Okay.
His main argument hinges on the idea of incentives.
Okay.
Imagine a king who views his country as his own personal property,
Mm-hmm.
something to be cherished, nurtured, and passed down through generations.
Okay.
Would he be inclined to recklessly exploit it,
Right.
to drain it dry for short-term gain?
Probably not. It'd be like setting your own inheritance on fire.
Exactly.
You'd want to take care of that investment.
Exactly. And that's where Hoppe's argument gets really interesting.
Okay.
He points out that historically taxes tended to be lower and more stable under monarchies.
Really?
Because just like you said, it was in the king's best interest to have a prosperous kingdom.
Right.
A thriving economy meant more wealth for everyone, including the monarch.
Yeah.
So there was a built-in incentive to keep taxes in check.
And that kind of long-term thinking probably impacted other economic policies too, right?
Absolutely.
Didn't Hoppe also have something to say about inflation and how it was handled under monarchies?
Absolutely. He argues that because monarchs often operated under systems where they had less direct control over the money supply,
Okay.
they couldn't just print more currency whenever they needed a quick fix.
Right.
This often led to greater price stability
Uh-huh.
and made it more difficult for governments to simply inflate their way out of debt.
So are you saying that the very system designed to give power to the people might have actually paved the way for more economic instability?
Potentially.
That's a pretty counterintuitive idea.
It is, and it challenges us to consider whether the concentration of power, even in the hands of democratically elected leaders,
Right.
might have some inherent downsides that we don't often talk about.
Okay, my mind is officially a little blown.
Yeah.
So we're seeing how a monarch, in theory, might actually be more cautious with their nation's wealth than an elected official.
Right.
But how does that translate to a democracy? I mean, does that long-term thinking just vanish when we switch systems?
That's precisely Hoppe's argument. He says that democracy fundamentally changes the game.
Okay.
The leader isn't an inheritor with a legacy to protect.
Right.
They're more like, well, a temporary renter.
Okay.
Their focus shifts to short-term wins. What can they accomplish during their term to benefit themselves and their allies?
Because let's be real, their main goal becomes securing that re-election.
Right.
Not necessarily prioritizing what's best for the country decades down the line. It's like
Yeah.
everyone's jostling for their piece of the pie, right? That whole tragedy of the commons thing we learned about back in school.
Exactly. Hoppe argues this leads to a constant pressure for redistribution of wealth, and not just the classic rich-to-poor scenario.
Right.
It becomes this free-for-all with various interest groups vying for government handouts and favors.
Which has to have a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
If people believe the government will always bail them out, why bother with things like long-term saving or making responsible financial decisions?
Right.
It's like we were talking about earlier with inflation and short-sighted policies.
You're connecting the dots precisely. Hoppe argues that this inherent short-termism in democracies can create volatile economic situations.
Okay.
Politicians are incentivized to focus on quick, flashy results, even if it means sacrificing a stable foundation for the future.
So we've got potential economic instability. What else? Doesn't Hoppe apply this line of thinking to things like, oh, I don't know, war?
You're right on track.
Yeah.
This is where Hoppe's argument gets really interesting, and let me tell you, it definitely challenged my own assumptions.
Okay.
He suggests that wars under monarchies, while certainly not peaceful picnics, might have been less devastating than those fought by democracies.
Now, hold on a minute. Less destructive? In our world of global conflicts and instant communication, that just sounds counterintuitive.
I know, right?
Ah,
But think about it this way. Hoppe says that because monarchs saw war as a more personal affair, often disputes between ruling families,
Right.
they were less likely to throw their entire populations into the meat grinder.
Mm.
Plus, they generally had less power to raise massive armies and the resources to sustain prolonged conflicts.
So the system designed to give more power to the people might have actually made warfare more destructive. That is a serious mind bender.
It's a challenging concept. And it becomes even more complex when we factor in democracy's tendency toward nationalism and expansionism, the idea that our nation is superior and destined for greatness.
So we're left with this idea that maybe, just maybe, centralized power, even when democratically elected, can have some unintended consequences. But surely Hop doesn't just leave us hanging with this unsettling revelation, does he?
You're right, he doesn't. Hoppe explores some alternative solutions, and this is where things get really fascinating. One of his most intriguing proposals is the idea of secession.
Okay, secession. I'll admit that word always brings up images of chaos and instability. Most people would say it's a recipe for disaster, not a solution to the problems we've been discussing. How does Hop convince us to see secession in a different light?
Well, it's definitely a thought-provoking concept. He asks us to think about those historical examples of smaller independent entities that thrived despite being surrounded by larger powers.
Okay.
He points to the free cities of medieval Europe, places like Hong Kong or Singapore today, as examples of how decentralization can actually breed success.
So instead of one massive centralized government, we'd have all these smaller, more localized systems competing with each other.
Exactly.
It's like a political marketplace, right?
Right.
Each one trying to attract citizens and businesses by offering the most attractive environment.
It's exactly. Hoppe argues that this competition would naturally lead to more responsive and accountable governance. After all, if you don't like the rules in one place, you can always pack up and move to a community that aligns better with your values.
It's like the difference between being stuck with a giant cable company that doesn't care about your customer service complaints versus having multiple streaming services all vying for your attention. It forces everyone to up their game.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And this kind of competition wouldn't just benefit individuals. Hoppe argues it would also foster greater innovation and economic growth on a larger scale.
This whole deep dive has been a wild ride. We've gone from questioning the assumed superiority of democracies to considering the potential benefits of monarchies, and now exploring the radical idea of secession as a path to a more prosperous and peaceful world.
It definitely challenges a lot of conventional wisdom, and that's the beauty of taking a deep dive like this. It forces us to confront our assumptions, consider alternative perspectives, and grapple with ideas that might initially seem counterintuitive.
So, as we wrap things up, what's the one thing you really hope our listener takes away from this exploration of political systems?
For me, it boils down to this. There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to governance. Every system has its own set of trade-offs, its strengths, and its weaknesses. The key is to stay curious, question everything, and never stop exploring new ideas, even if they challenge our deeply held beliefs.
Well said. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire someone out there to take a closer look at their own assumptions and maybe even spark a few lively debates around the dinner table. Until next time, keep exploring.